I would like to introduce to you our opening ceremony. It brings me so much pleasure to introduce to these two wonderful people. Can I invite Ms. Jacqueline Poh and Mr. Ahmed Mazhari on stage, please? So while they are stepping up on stage, it's such a pleasure to have two very important stakeholders in the development of an ecosystem for women in technology. It brings me so much pleasure to present to you a champion for women in technology who's also been such a champion for us. She loves tech, Ms. Jacqueline Poh. Ms. Jacqueline Poh has been recently appointed as the Managing Director of the Economic Development Board of Singapore, and she was the founding Chief Executive of the Government Technology Agency of Singapore, GovTech, the previous Deputy Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office Strategy Group. And she's been in the civil service for a long time, and we're so excited to have her with us. Next, we have with us the Asia president of the world's most valuable tech company with a market cap of $2.49 trillion. Wow, I can't even imagine that. Ahmed Mazhari joined Microsoft right at the beginning of the pandemic in February 2020, following 23 successful years at GE, where he last served as SVP and Chief Growth Officer. As president of Microsoft Asia, Ahmed oversees 20 countries, some 30,000 employees, and 100,000 partners. This is going to be such an exciting panel, and today we'll be talking about supercharging an ecosystem and how we attract more women to pursue tech as a career or as an entrepreneur. So maybe, Jacqueline, can I start with you? You know, in the past few years, technology has been all the rage. We see this all over the news, you know, investing in startups, family offices. Can you tell us a little bit more about how Singapore's economy has changed and what's next?
Thank you very much. And I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I'd like to congratulate the organizers of She Loves Tech for being able to bring back this conference in its almost full glory. And I hope that we can actually see bigger, even a bigger conference next year. Singapore has changed a great deal, partly before the pandemic and partly as a result of the pandemic. And technology has really come to the forefront of a lot of the things we're doing in order to be a knowledge-driven, innovation-driven economy. When I was growing up, very few people would have said that Singapore was an innovation hub. Very few people would have said that this was a hotbed of entrepreneurship. In fact, being an entrepreneur was not something that you would have aspired to if you were in school. You might have wanted to be a doctor, you might have wanted to be a lawyer, some people wanted to be engineers. But these kinds of vocations were not regarded as profitable, as fulfilling, or as trodden paths for Singaporeans. But I'd say in the last 10 years, a lot of things have changed in that regard. I think our landscape has moved a lot more in the direction of high-tech, deep tech. And by this, I'm increasingly seeing women in fields that are not simply in digital technology. I know quite a bit about digital technology, and I'm really glad to see that there have been a lot more women entering computer science and including a lot of the user experience and the things around digital technology. But I also see women in other forms of technology, such as biotech, such as microelectronics and manufacturing. I see technology moving into spaces like sustainability, which are really hot right now, and into areas like agri-food tech. So what we regard as tech, I think, is an increasingly blended concept across a variety of fields. And Singapore is making a big push into many of these fields. The way we see it, as we come out of the pandemic next year, in pretty big way, we're going to see global growth rebounding back to quite respectable levels. We've noticed that global FDI is pretty much recovering in 2022. And a lot of that is moving into the Southeast Asian region. And of that amount that moves into Southeast Asia, a lot of it is being invested in the Southeast Asian internet economy or digital economy. So I think what you will see is that businesses that are well invested in Asia, well invested in digital, focused on innovation, looking at sustainability, and ensuring resilience are those that will thrive.
You know, we're noticing exactly, what you talked about, women going into biotech, into agri-tech, into sustainability. This is exactly the kind of industries as well that we are seeing our founders from She Loves Tech going into. And, I would just want to follow on with one question. For EDB, what are the priorities for EDB as you lead it into an era of innovation and disruption and change?
I think a lot of it is building on the foundations that we've had. EDB is a 60-year-old organization. We turned 60 in 2021. We had grand plans for a large celebration, which I don't think actually happened because of COVID restrictions.
But we can celebrate it here.
We certainly can. But it's had a long history of attracting foreign direct investment and really interest and investment into Singapore and also into Southeast Asia. I think we want to continue on the path of getting the sort of the best-in-class investments into Singapore and into Asia, continuing to be a hub for not just Asia, but frankly as a global hub, particularly as travel starts to resume. We do see our role as building ecosystems, and particularly ecosystems around some of the best forward-thinking companies in the world in areas like the green economy and the digital economy. And that's where women have a large part to play as well. And we also are embracing a sort of a new role in helping to build globally leading Singapore-based companies. And this is entailed reaching out to a lot more of our entrepreneurs, bringing companies to the next level, working with our unicorns, especially those that have already IPO'd and exited, to enhance their economic contributions, to hire more people, have more activities, and bring more solutions to Asia and to the world.
Wonderful, and this ties in really nicely to Ahmed. Ahmed, when I first met you, you had just moved to Singapore. And I remember you telling me about all the time that you had spent in Europe and in India. What are your observations on the ecosystem for tech in Singapore versus some of the other places that you've lived and worked?
It's most of my observations because of the pandemic have been digital, not physical. But first, let me start by thanking you for organizing such a fantastic event and the privilege of being with Jacqueline, who I actually had the honor of meeting just before she even started in her role. It's just fantastic to see the energy in this room. And I was just struck by when you walked in and said a physical event. I know how energizing just these little things of joy bring to us. I've had the privilege of actually traveling a little bit. Your question on what Singapore brings to the table in terms of innovation, it's really, Singapore is a nation with a very corporate kind of governance and a long-term planning process. So I see in my interactions with the government here a very deep desire to build companies of the future, to enable industries of the future. And therefore, an event like this, where we're promising to bring capital, technology, ideas, and innovation to women leaders is just fantastic. And the pledge that the government of Singapore has made in terms of bringing education, being more inclusive, is going to significantly accelerate the ability. I mean, when we say women can contribute to tech, women can contribute to progress. And this is why I get so excited by this opportunity.
Wonderful. Talking about that, right, and talking about women contributing to progress, what are your thoughts on the ecosystem for women in tech in Singapore during this very, very strange time, AKA the time of coronavirus?
Let me first perhaps start with just a global perspective on the role that women can play in the industry and tech. Perhaps the coronavirus has been a great trigger for creating more inclusion. We as a company, as Microsoft, are suggesting that 50% of the time you work from home, 50% of the time you're in the office, which to me unlocks a great opportunity to create flexibility for women, right? But really, for us to make progress, we have to start at the bottom. I'm encouraged to hear that women participation in Singapore is much higher in technology than in different parts of the world. If I look at just Microsoft, right, we're fundamentally trying to build women and inclusion at the bottom, at the start. 50% of our university hires today are women. And globally, we have got to 30% women in our global workforce, with 22% women in tech roles, when the global average in cloud is 12%. So we are putting our money where our mouth is. We're ensuring that we're building fundamentally on what enables long-term progress. We're training 1 million women in AI in China in association with DD Consulting. In India, we just launched a program on cyber upskilling specifically for women, which was actually announced by the Prime Minister. And this is just a short list of the 6 million upskilling that we have done in Asia over the last 15 months.
So you do think that there has been, compared to the past, there has been progress for women in technology and having more women in tech?
Leanne, actually, frankly, businesses have no choice. Today, the biggest challenge we have, and Jacqueline started by talking about sustainability, agri-tech, food tech, digital ventures, etc. Fundamentally, everything is powered by talent. And we have a finite set of talent in the world. Sadly, we have excluded half of them. And therefore, our opportunity to create talent, create the talent that is needed for coding, like when we think about it, in the next 5 years, 149 million tech jobs will get created. 750 million over the next 10 years. There is no way we can succeed without bringing women at a rate faster than we've done in the past.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm going to transition from kind of the corporate to the entrepreneurial realm. As a founder myself who's built a couple of tech companies, I used to feel like it was such a lonely journey. I mean, many years ago, I looked around and there were no women. It was me attending fintech festivals. It was me attending, all these tech festivals, and it was really very lonely. It was a very predominantly male-dominated tech industry. So Jacqueline, you've been really successful in, having a career that in tech, which has been very male-dominated environments. You've helped to found Singapore's GovTech and also our EDB's first woman managing director. So why is it important, in your view, to attract girls and women to tech and into entrepreneurial endeavors?
Like Ahmed mentioned, I think we made a huge amount of progress in the last 10 years, trying to get women into technology roles of a huge variety of them. I think a statistic that has been recently quoted is that the global numbers of women in the tech workforce increased from about 25% to 28% in the last few years. That was already an improvement, but as you can tell, it's less than a third. In Singapore, it's 41%. And that brings us a lot closer to what equates to equality. This is the year of celebrating Singapore women. I'm sure some of you will know that and have been taken part in a large number of discussion groups, focus groups, with the Singapore government and with various organizations about how we can improve the cause of diversity and gender equality in Singapore. Along the way, we found that we have, in the workforce, been a lot more successful than we had thought, and perhaps have not mentioned as much of it as we should. Our gender pay gap is not very high. It's about 5 or 6%, much lower than many parts of the world. And when Bloomberg published a recent survey about perceptions about gender inequality, they said that it actually had increased in many parts of the world due to the pandemic and what it meant for women working from home with home-based learning and having to deal with both home and work responsibilities without a huge amount of childcare, because there were a number of lockdowns in many countries during the pandemic. But in Singapore, the numbers were completely reversed. There was a great amount of optimism that this was a very gender-equal country, particularly in the workforce. And I thought I would like to mention this because it confounds a lot of the views that individuals have about what it means to be a woman in the workforce, in technology, in Singapore. And so I feel very, very privileged to be part of this country where, in fact, because talent is scarce and because we're such a small country and we don't have that many people, talent is particularly scarce, we have to actually reach out to a group of people that hold up half the sky and put them increasingly into leadership positions. It's important for women to be entrepreneurs because they create the products they know that a group of people need, which otherwise might never have been made. And they lend a perspective to product design. And I saw this even when I was in GovTech dealing with my software engineers. We lend a perspective to the user that they had, frankly, the bros had never, in engineering, had never even thought about. So I think it's very important. So in entrepreneurship, we have so much going for us in terms of capital raising for companies, both women-led as well as not women-led. We have now roughly about 400 family offices, 200 VCs, a plethora of PE and PE funds, and of course a large amount of both public markets as well as venture debt. It's a great time to be seeking funding as an entrepreneur in Singapore, and it's a great time to be seeking markets within Asia. So if women want to step up at this time, I don't think the conditions could be any more ripe.
You know,
can I just make one
ahead,
comment?
Ahmed.
Sorry. Just in terms of what you said, Jacqueline, that the last 10 years have been pretty much on the upward path as far as inclusion is concerned. Our intentionality around the gender pay gap is very clearly established in what we deliver. So in markets, so in Singapore, India, Australia, China, the US, and 8 other countries where we've started measurement, we're fully at parity. We're fully at parity. So it gives me immense pride to work for a company that is really pushing not only the concept of bringing in and building leaders of the future, but ensuring that women are in leadership positions and therefore enabling progress in the future.
So that's exactly what I kind of want to follow on. 41% and 50% at parity, these sound like great numbers, right? But do the both of you have numbers about the women on top, right? Women in leadership positions, what kind of percentages are we looking at? Sorry if I'm putting both of you on the spot a bit.
I can start. Look, the first part of creating progress is being very clear of the gaps that we're at. We have an hourglass problem. So we bring in more than 50%, and then we attract back at the top. So it really goes like an hourglass. We're losing a lot of women in the middle, which is mid-career. And therefore, our interventions are around how do you bring women who've taken a break for raising kids, who've taken a break because they've followed their partner or their husbands to another geography. And what the pandemic has done is it's created a great platform for us to be more inclusive in bringing women back.
And you talked about that really shifting with the 50% work from home and 50% in the office, because one of the things that we knew pre-pandemic was that our current work structures were not that favorable for women, women who were caregivers as well. And so that, I think, just having this almost like shift and being able to change the work structures so drastically, I think this will hopefully really help.
I think one aspect that I want to kind of draw everyone's attention to is, why am I here today? I had lunch with Leanne, and the one takeaway after 90 minutes was when she said to me, globally, only 2% of capital comes to women. And I was already shattered when she said, hold on, in Southeast Asia, it's 0.9%. And I'm like, we must trust women with more capital because they are more reliable usually than men.
I'd like to give my perspective on the caregiving issue, because you've raised it, and it is a huge issue that was raised in our year of conversations with women that the Singapore government conducted. And it's also the major issue why we don't see more women in leadership positions. And I think this has been a finding in every country all over the world. And it speaks to what Ahmed said about women who leave the workforce, even temporarily, really taking that on-ramp, but never getting back on the same ramp to the C-suite. And from the C-suite, it then gets very difficult, if you're not in the C-suite, to be a member of a board and take up leadership positions at sort of a chairman or corporate level. So you can see that each of these things has a knock-on effect. I think one of the key parameters that will help women get back into leadership positions, even with work from home and flexible work arrangements, which are critical, is shared parental responsibilities. And the very truth is that in many households, whether in Singapore or elsewhere, the expectations of domestic and parental responsibilities are very different for men and women. They may be changing, and I do see some of that change happening, but ultimately it is women who bear the bulk of taking care of children, if they have children, or taking care of the household. And that has a huge impact on their future career aspirations. What we have found during the pandemic is something very interesting. When women and men both went to work from home, the men and women who had no children found that to be a rather ideal arrangement. It gave a great deal of flexibility. The men and women who had much older children, those in their teens and so on, or for 7 onwards, also found it quite useful, because they could keep an eye on their kids, whilst their children, whether they did home-based learning or were going to school, saw more of their parents than otherwise, but it was still quite a good arrangement. Those parents who had children aged 1 to 6 all complained and said that this was an untenable situation. They had toddlers running around, and it was impossible for them to get any work done during the day, and therefore they had to do all the work at night, thereby causing them to have extremely little sleep, and sleep deprivation and stress for long periods of time, then caused them to want to drop out of the workforce. So I can say it was a very different arrangement for those who had very young children versus those who had older children or none. And part of that is, and I had to ask this, which is, was there a shared arrangement between husband and wife to take care of the kids whilst that entire work from home was happening? And very often, when I ask this question of my staff or other young members of the teams, that I have interaction with, they said this, well, my husband gets the study, and I get the dining table. I have to take care of the kids, and he has to concentrate on the work, and it's a different split of responsibilities. Or he goes back to work, and I stay at home with the kids and do remote work. I'm not saying this happens in every household, but I've heard it often enough to believe that I think one of the key aspects to leadership will be a much more equal sharing, both in the workplace and at home.
Wonderful, wonderful. You know, I think the pandemic has really kind of blurred our personal lives and also our work lives as well. And, you know, previously we've kept that very separate, but during the pandemic, when we've had to do a lot of video conferencing and everything, now, you know, I've been in so many meetings where I've met, right, wives, husbands, pets, babies, and you know, I really hope that the progress that we've made in the last 1.5 years or so doesn't stop here, right? That we continue to create that shared responsibility that you talked about and that inclusivity. Jacqueline, I just want to just quickly ask about girls and schools, right? And Ahmed, please feel free to, because I know that education is a big passion of yours as well. How do we encourage schools to engage students from secondary school or even earlier, right, to take an interest in technology? How can we, you know, help girls to go into fields of technology that is beyond just providing them with coding lessons?
Coding lessons are quite important.
They are.
So I think one of the great things that the Singapore system has been able to engender is some sort of exposure to coding for every child going throughout our major, you know, sort of P1 to Sec 4 system. I think there's an arrangement called Code for Fun, where most, if not all, children go for a few weeks of coding practice, and then they can proceed to make that a bit more of a passion and do more in terms of software work, as if they wish. Most schools have computer science CCAs, robotics, and so on. It's remarkable to note that in many robotics competitions, you will find that the girls' school teams are the ones who win. So I think that there can be things done in the main curriculum in terms of bringing the coding in terms of the CCAs, in terms of having CCAs, or what we call co-curricular activities for those of you who are tuning in online, that involve an element of digital technology, such as robotics. I think there are many other things that can be done. I think there are things that can be done in terms of introducing hackathons in schools, where children can be invited to solve problems related to their schools, or frankly related to the wider society at large, and solve them using technology. I think that tech can be infused in many of the other subjects students take, whether it's science, whether it's theory of knowledge, whether it's economics. You can still bring in things like data science, machine learning, into analyzing a lot of the data that is made available via open data sources today. And kids can actually make use of that in trying to solve the problems that the school poses to them, or the ones in their hackathons. So there's lots of things that can be done in schools, and actually are being done in many schools today.
Wonderful. Ahmed, you know, this is an area that you're really passionate about, that you told me while we were having lunch, on the line of education. You know, is there anything that you want to add to that?
You know, just to build on what Jacqueline said, I think we as technology companies have a role to play to ensure that it's not seen as complicated and complex, because the barriers to entry are really driven by the fact that people think technology is complex and, you know, it's a lot of hard work or it's too difficult to learn, which frankly in the last 10 years has changed quite dramatically. I'd start to think about technology You know, when we say agri-tech, food tech, it'll get to a point where the tech needn't be mentioned. Tech will become integral. It's like math. It's like learning to count. It's like learning to read. It's like learning to write. That's how tech will become. But the role that tech companies like ours have to play is to ensure that we make the barriers to entry low. We create technology that's simple, that's done easy. That's why our own power platforms of low code, no code, our power automate platforms, et cetera. And we're trying to democratize as much as possible, which is why we have a whole education sector globally that's trying to ensure that we create more access to technology across the world, which has frankly been, in the past, been a privilege.
You know, talking about that and that kind of education that you're bringing to individuals, you know, what are the skilling and reskilling needs of individuals?
The skilling and reskilling needs of the world are at a scale which I think is not understood today. I reminded everyone earlier today that we are talking about 150 million, 149 million jobs being created in tech, 750 over the next decade. We're not sure as an industry how we'll get there. So the notion of relearning, unlearning all the time. But education will also start to come through in very small bites. And we're working with, you know, NASSCOM in India, for example, to train 1 million students on AI. But we're also working with our other partners like Grab here. You know, so we had this very innovative program where we ran with Grab to train their drivers to help them skill into tech. You know, the challenge, Lian, is people think about tech as this thing on a big pedestal. Tech is pervasive. It starts and is at every level, whether you are in a hawker center, whether you're in a small micro business, you're in a small law firm, or you're in a large corporate.
You know, you're exactly right. When I talk to my own parents, I talk to my mom, and she's always like, Mom does not understand technology, but yet she always has, you know, the latest models of the phones, and so that pervasiveness, I think that understanding of that pervasiveness, and sometimes, you know, going away and moving away from that notion that tech is scary, that tech is this really complicated thing, I think that's really necessary. So, you know, when I first started my career, it was in a large engineering conglomerate in the UK, now almost 15 years ago, and I was one of the only women leaders that wasn't in HR. Ahmed, can I just ask you, what are your observations on the tech industry being male-dominated? Has this changed?
Well, the short answer is it has, but it doesn't mean that we're there. I go back to when I was in engineering school in India, right? In a class of 300, there were 10 women. So there is no way we can have parity in terms of participation on the senior levels, Jacqueline, that you pointed out. It's going to be a very slow process. But as we pointed out in our discussions earlier, that if you look at global participation of women in the tech force, example at Microsoft, is now already at 30%, right? 22% of our global hardcore tech jobs are women. So there is progress. The progress is slow. We have to ensure that the barrier to entry for women is low, and we also have to equally ensure that there are programs, there are methodologies to ensure we retain them. Because it's not that we're not able to bring half the workforce of women. We just lose them when they're in their late 20s.
You know, I think that your Chief Diversity Officer, Lindsay, talks a lot about diversity and inclusion being necessary in building a $2.49 trillion company.
2.5 now.
2.5 now. Yes, I can't keep track. So I'm really excited to continue to be part of that, discussion and to see how, as well, that we can continue to make Microsoft and the whole entire tech industry more inclusive. To that, I want to talk about a specific vertical in technology, artificial intelligence. This is something that we've all heard, but I don't know how many of us can really say that we truly understand this. Jacqueline, is Singapore ready for an AI disruption?
I think ready or not, we're going to get one. I think a lot has been said and actually invested into AI-based companies in Singapore in the last 2 to 3 years. And AI is getting at least machine learning is getting very pervasive across a lot of industry verticals in Singapore. You talked about this issue of skilling and reskilling earlier, and what to do with a workforce that is maybe had not been trained in tech before. I think there are a lot of tech-light jobs. And even in artificial intelligence, which is sometimes seen as the holy grail of things that people can't really understand about digital technology, you see some of those aspects coming in. And one of the examples of that is robotic process engineering, or automation, sorry, robotic process automation, which I think many companies are bringing even their 50 and 60-year-old staff through. The main reason is because it improves their tasks and systematizes them and automates them so that they can be done a lot more efficiently. So I've met so many companies that have basically said, well, I've told my 50-year-old administrator, HR administrator, for example, that this is the way to do RPA. And in some way, that's a sort of a very easy to access tech-light job, because there are a lot of tech-light jobs that will require reskilling in future. And that is related to artificial intelligence. On the more complicated end, Singapore treats artificial intelligence as a national priority. So there's a national strategy for artificial intelligence under the Smart Nation and Digital Government group. And that has also led to the creation of a national AI office. The main aims of this is to really introduce AI into some of the major industry verticals in Singapore. Everything from smart manufacturing to education and healthcare to security, and to be able to use that in a way that is human-centric. So there have been a number of initiatives under the National AI Office, which runs that AI strategy, to do a few things. The first is to produce the kind of talent that we need to actually execute on AI projects. The second is to ensure that there are cross-cutting data sets available for them to work on. And that third is that there are test bidding opportunities present for our AI talent. I've recently announced one when I was opening a semiconductor event. It was actually a really interesting collaboration between the National AI Office and one of our large semiconductor manufacturers to build a sort of factory of the future, using a lot of AI processes to improve the efficiency by which chips are actually manufactured in Singapore. And that's really important because there's a huge global chip shortage at the moment. And if we don't have that, we're not going to have the rest of the digital being created. So there's hardware. Software sits on hardware. The number of major initiatives caught my eye from the National AI Strategy and the National AI Office. One is actually in education. It's quite interesting. It's a project to use AI to mark the exam scripts of students in Singapore so that we can address one of the key pain points of our teachers, which is that marking scripts again and again is incredibly tedious.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long time. It's incredibly tedious, and there's certain things that can actually be made a lot easier using AI. The other one is a project called Selena Plus, which is a collaboration between the National Eye Center, NUS, and a local startup called Iris. Iris. And what it does is diabetic retinopathy, which is to look at your changes in your retina to see the progress or a deterioration of diabetes in the patient. And that, I understand, has been incredibly successful using AI technology. So on the back of some of these really big flagship projects, as well as many, many small ones, and then a lot of training of AI talent, I think there's a lot that can be done in Singapore, and it's being done in a very intentional way.
Wonderful. So we've come close to the end of our session, and I just want to end off with a very quick question to the both of you. You know, I think I know the answer for Jacqueline, but what do you consider the top cities and countries in Asia for tech ecosystems, and what makes them attractive?
That's not going to be in 30 seconds or a minute, but you know what technology has done is that it's no more a set of cities. You would talk about Boston, Singapore, Palo Alto, Tokyo, Bangalore, Sydney, etc. We see that becoming, I mean, a small city in Indonesia, a small village in Indonesia can create a great idea, and that's what tech is doing. It's reducing barriers to entrepreneurship, to scaling, and to generating ideas. And we as Microsoft, I have to advertise that, with 100,000 partners, are probably the best in helping scale technologies and partners and ideas.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Well, you knew my answer. I think Singapore is the best place to be if you want to be part of a great tech ecosystem that's going to be really expanding a great deal in the course of the next decade, and has really made a lot of progress in the last decade. So I think this is the time, and like I say, across digital tech, biotech, agri-tech, and so on, sustainability, I think this is where a lot of pieces can come together with MNCs, SMEs, startups, and a huge amount of the public and private capital landscape that we have available. So I think we're in a region that has a lot of the problems and the use cases. I think we're in a place that has a lot of the capital and a lot of the talent. And I think we're big enough and yet small enough to make that happen.
Well, this is the reason why She Loves Tech chose its international headquarters to be in Singapore. Thank you so much to the two of you. I mean, I've been frantically taking down notes because there's so many good points. Just as a summary, you know, my key takeaways is talent is key, that women need to be part of the design of products, as Jacqueline pointed out, and that women are essential to progress, and that businesses have no choice but to involve women at the bottom, the middle, and the top. And I'm so excited to also be moving towards a human-centric technology as well. So thank you so much to my two wonderful panelists, Jacqueline Poh and also Ahmed Mazhari.